the next tool to kind of triangulate our efforts. With that, I'm going to bring back the VPN, so I believe we will actually need it. Go ahead and just kind of retype in. And with that, we'll go ahead and I'll just shut this for a little bit. We'll navigate back to the main page. You know, there's not only links, but I also have ways of, you know, showing it in the PowerPoint, you know, how to find these things. So we kind of did see roughly where a lot of those cropland acres are. So we have like a few tools. This one here, SLPP web application, where we can identify some areas. This is mostly focused on cropland, but we do have another tool to look at rangeland. And the interesting part here is that basically, if you look at those practices, they're almost always going to be, you know, on our 116, as well as our 162. They're almost all going to be on grazing lands or croplands, and disproportionately they're going to be on croplands. But you know, there's definitely some things on grazing lands. We can get into that, especially when we drill down with the QT tool. So with that, we're going to go ahead and pick Oklahoma. It'll take just a moment to come up. You'll kind of see here some of these watersheds. These are all HUC 12, so it's good to remember that. We can go ahead and we can see, oh boy, there's kind of a cluster here, a cluster here. We know that, you know, there's cropland that comes up through here, and this is a sensitive area. I'm going to, like in this scenario, I'm going to look at prioritizing right in the middle here. So as you see, you can go ahead and you can click on that. You can even have the HUC 12 number. You know, this is one of the things we'll look at, especially for these cropland acres. So, and the nice thing is there's quite a few adjoining counties as well too. This is where this particular tool here is where the carbon, basically the different climate change practices, they're identified in the IRA, which there's, you know, some funding. There's quite a bit of funding, at least for the next year or two, you know, in IRA. There's going to be a lot of people interested in it. Go ahead and we will drill down and find that area. One thing that's kind of cool is you can come up here and you can grab watersheds. So I want to find that same watershed. Get a little bit closer, because these things won't really show up very good until you get closer. It's 30110. So let's find that here. Let's see, 30110. 30110. That looks a little familiar too, doesn't it? Yep, it sure does. So one thing we can do is, you know, this is identified in this tool here as being a focus area, not only this watershed, but the surrounding watersheds. So one thing we can do is, now that we can see this, we can look at, this is a way of looking at practices that may be a really good fit. And these are all in megatons per year. So if you look in this county, which includes these watersheds, you know, 327, that is a practice that, you know, could have a large potential. You know, one of the things about, you know, this layer too is if you're looking at megatons of carbon, you know, in many instances, you'll be looking at, you know, with the forestry practices, what's taken up in the plant itself, but you will have some megatons of carbon sequestered in the soil. And of course, you know, looking at our principles of soil health, if we can, you know, sequester carbon in a way that, you know, puts it in soil and is able to, get all the positive benefits of having greater organic matter in the soil, then it's kind of a win-win. So we can kind of cruise through some of these practices here. And if you look in here, and of course they're all kind of relative. In fact, if you go ahead and you click on one of these counties, you can kind of scroll through and then you can kind of compare. So 327, for instance, you're looking at 176,000, 81,000 for conservation crop rotation, no-till 142,000, as well as you get into things like cover crop. You have some decent, especially when you look at combining some of these practices. Just going to no-till with 63,000, or I'm sorry, mulch-till 63,000. That's not too bad. As well as some windbreaks. You're obviously not going to windbreak up the whole county. However, there is some potential there, especially when it comes to maybe assisting with a wind erosion HEL type plan, which can be very common. And then you look in some of these other practices. Of course, if you went through and if you planted, some of these areas down to, like range seeding, for instance, you could see what some of that potential is. Let's go back to look at maybe some range acres. Let's look and see what may be available and what's more crucial, within this tool. It's the same tool we were using to go ahead and look at, basically go and look at, those land uses. I think that's a really cool way of looking at it because, especially within some of these states that have a lot going on, it can be helpful. Of course, looking at range, it only looks at a finite amount of states. It doesn't include many eastern states, obviously, but there are quite a few states that it can give you some ideas in. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the county map. And then with this, we can kind of follow along a little bit as well too with this. So we'll see. So if you see these are the most sensitive areas in rangeland, you'll kind of see this shaped county. You also see these, shaped counties in through here. So let's see if we can zoom out a little bit on this same tool and see if we can find, some of these and identify maybe some real good practices that are more focused on range. So, you see this one has a lot of orange, means there's a lot of sensitivity in those range acres. So that's this county right here. You'll also see that, going south of there and southwest of there is also. So this is just looking at conservation crop rotation. It's not going to be a very good indicator. Let's go ahead and click that off, close these up. Let's go back and look at some of these practices that are most applicable on grazing lands, 512, 528, and 550. So let's go down here to 512. I'm going to do it on range acres. So if you see there's a good potential to go ahead and that practice to be successful, at least as far as megatons per year of carbon in 512. You also see, this one's for pasture, and that has to do, of course, with just how those are tagged in the system. But we'll also look at prescribed grazing. So this might be a really good opportunity to go ahead and look at some of those older plans and maybe update them to go ahead and include some soil health principles in them, especially when it comes to clipping and doing some other infiltration tests that may be able to be added. Coming through and doing basically a range planting, it gives you some ideas here. So So with that, that makes me think that, a strategy would be to, focus, down here further south on some cropland type practices, and while focusing on some more range type practices, up here. So another next step we can take is to, so we'll see, well, this county here is actually getting, has a relatively high percentage of folks that have that are socially disadvantaged and that have participated in programs, while some of these counties to the south and west just not as much. And that could be for a whole host of reasons, but it may identify some real opportunities to reach out to some different folks. So we could say, okay, maybe this is the highest county, but maybe we'll include that, but maybe we'll, also, look at these counties as kind of part of this area that we want to kind of prioritize. Just kind of see if there's any. In this particular instance, in these areas, it doesn't, there aren't tribal lands. It's not to say that you can't work with the Osage Reservation, which is the southern part of the Flint Hills. It's not to say that you can't maybe, look at a separate initiative or a separate way to kind of reaching out to those folks. One of the nice things with working with tribes, of course, is, once you make the right connections within that tribe, you can have a very large impact and you can deal with a lot of land to make a huge impact.